Welcome to the Path to Podcast Success. My name is Evan Johnson, and I want to share with you how to develop and maintain a successful podcast. My guests and I will discuss all things podcasting and how your podcast can become an essential part of your business. That means more revenue, better relationships with your audience, and so much more. If you haven't already, check out our website at ipodcastedit.com and enter your email address to get each episode delivered directly to your inbox, along with some other free information I'm sure you'll find useful. Get ready to turn on your mic and join me on the path to podcast success. Hey Jason, thank you so much for coming on a second time to my podcast. I'm excited to keep the conversation going, pick it up right where we left off.
You bet, Evan. Let's see what we can teach.
So last time we talked a lot about the why of podcasting. So we talked about, what your fears were, why you're doing it, what your hopes are, what your dreams are with your podcast, exactly what it is that you do with Cold Star Technologies and space, which I think is very interesting. Mm-hmm. So let's dive a little bit more into the specifics. So give us a little bit more background on exactly what you do for money, right? So what your work is and how your podcast fits in with that.
So there's a few different things. One is I'm partnered with a great data scientist whose day job is with one of the big legal and big business fraud prevention companies in the US. And so we are allowed, as long as we don't compete with them. So we can't approach government, we can't do big business fraud prevention, but we can do small business fraud prevention. Okay. And any data science, machine learning, AI type work. So we do that. On the space side, I don't know if this is going to be interesting to your audience, but I'll just say it. The small satellites field, which is making satellites. I'm looking for something that's, but I don't know. I like they're tiny, right? They're the CubeSats are like 1U's, like pretty small. So, and you can build those up, but the failure rate for these things is over 40%. So that's appalling, right? If you were to get in your car and 4 times out of 10 it didn't start, you would do something about it. You'd be like, this is crazy. I'm not going to do anything, have anything to do with this anymore until it gets fixed. So process reengineering is a major part of what we do. And what that means is writing down what people do and the order and the steps, and then optimizing it and figuring out, okay, is there a better way that we can do this that results in not a 40% failure rate? And so there's a root cause analysis, because there are big causes for why, and a lot of it's time pressure. And it's not about engineering. There are a lot of engineers in the space field, as you may have guessed, and they're all like, "What? We're doing everything great." It's like, okay. The problem is not in the engineering area. The problem is everywhere else, which those guys are not trained in. So part of the podcast, when I committed to space with season 2 here, and we're this week. It is early February when we're recording this. I'm 17 episodes into season 2. So we're at 102, 103 episodes on the podcast. And I've recorded at least another dozen that are waiting around. And the queue keeps getting longer and longer because people keep booking. I'm booked into May now. And that's a little scary, because the distribution, that gap between when we record and when it comes out, is expanding, right? I don't like that, and I don't know what to do about it. So that's a curious problem. I don't want to start diluting the thing by putting it out every, twice a week, right? But something's got to be done, and I'm not sure what it is yet. So the good news is it's popular, right? For those folks who listened to the first episode that we did, remember my big fear from my past experience was not being relevant to the target market. Well, it seems that I've solved that problem, and so that's a good thing.
Yeah, and hey, it's a good problem to have, honestly.
Right. So what I wanted to accomplish was to get known as somebody in the space field that people want to connect to, and it's made LinkedIn networking very easy. Somebody with a specific knowledge set that's unusual because it's not engineering, it's process improvement, right? Which is a different thing altogether. And to show these folks that, hey, this thing exists and it matters and you should come talk to me about it because this is the source of where to get it, right? And not many other people are talking about it. But that 40% plus failure rate is something that needs to be handled, especially as we go, like some of these companies are starting to produce thousands of these units, right? So the academics, the universities produce 1 and 2, and so they don't, at a time, so they don't really care so much about the process. But the thing is, they go through all this effort. It's like a year and a half of their lives, and then they launch the thing and it doesn't work.
Right.
Well, great. What did you do, right? So even if you are just making one at a time, it still matters. But the bigger companies, something like SpaceX, they're moving towards a more automotive style of continuous manufacturing process, which is something that we know a lot about. So it's a different topic than you'll find out there in the real world. However, or the regular world, I should say.
Yeah.
Space is very real. But let me, I guess, an example that would bring it down to earth is this. If you were to go to a fast food drive-through, and you're stuck in the line and the process is slow and you have to wait to put your order in, and then you got to wait to drive up to the window to pay, and as you're there you hear the beeping of this alarm because they're way over the time that they've got budgeted to feed every customer, right? There's a cycle time for that. And you can see the clock is flashing red that they've got there. Say maybe it's supposed to be 2 minutes, 3 minutes, something like that as a turnaround time between when people pay and when they're supposed to get their order. It's not going good, right? And so what that does is it causes a number of effects, which are people don't want to go to that restaurant, right? So they go somewhere else, or the average order value drops because who wants to wait in line for more stuff, right? And the problem is these guys are barely breaking even as it is. Like at the McDonald's drive-through is like they make 12 cents or something on average on the order. It's not good, right? They're not making hand over fist because the orders are small. People come in for the dollar menu, right? So if you can raise that up and get people comfortable flowing through, and then just the flow rate, like how many customers can you serve in an hour? That matters, especially when it's lunch hour. And that's the critical time that people are showing up. So where process engineering is very useful is getting into how that restaurant runs. And a lot of people don't like Chick-fil-A, but for their stance on certain issues. But as far as like productivity and getting people through the line and getting them served and getting that average order value up and people out of there happy with their food, they are great at that. You'll see in Wilmington especially, I've seen this, they put a guy out there with a tablet and nobody has to go up through the drive-through window now. He walks up to the car, takes the order, puts it in on the tablet, and that's in there. So all you do is hand the cash over at the window and you're gone, right? So that's an example of a well-run process, right? And so that's what I would like space to get to, is where things are smooth. By the way, this 40+% failure rate is after you take out the 6% or so that's caused by the rocket exploding and blowing everything up with it. So you've already taken that out. And that 6% is a standard, whether it's 1970 or 1990 or 2020. It's no matter what the launch vehicle is, it seems to be around 6%, but you pull that out. So that's the kind of thing that I want people talking to us about. And so to have guests on who are in the field and they're operators or space lawyers or supply chain folks, operational excellence people, right? Folks who are in that field and talking about problems that they're having, and despite their attempts to make it look like they have all the answers and put on that perfect front that, oh, everything's fantastic where we are. They will still come up with problems and explain problems and say, okay, because they can't help it. They're just going to pop out with symptoms and say, okay, this is happening and this delay is happening and that kind of thing. And
Right.
to get it around, that messaging around that, hey, actually problems do exist out here and we have to acknowledge this 40+% failure rate, which a lot of people are trying to stick their heads in the sand about and pretend doesn't exist. Okay, I'm not looking for everybody as a customer or a client, but I guess once in a while there is going to be somebody who goes, oh, this thing is really a problem and we need to, just stop it from happening because it costs a lot of money. It's like a cheap launch is $250,000, $500,000, right?
Wow.
And it's thousands of dollars a pound to get stuff up in orbit. So we're wasting that if we throw something up there and 2 times out of 5, the thing just doesn't work.
I know, that's crazy. This 40% failure rate. That's really like, what if 4 times out of 10 your car doesn't start? I mean, that's definitely, you need to do something about it. And it sounds like you're trying to become the guy and succeeding. It sounds like you're becoming the guy where people say, right, of course. But if someone sees that, says, I don't like how 4 times out of 10 this thing that I spent all this money on to get to space doesn't even work, then you're the guy that they turn to. And your podcast is helping you do that, which I think is incredible. And I think that can translate into pretty much any industry. Like for me in podcast industry, I don't have a specific percentage as far as podcast failures go. Well, there is, I think it's like 70% or something of podcasts or 90% even on iTunes have 5 or less episodes and they're not publishing continually.
Right.
So if someone wants to start a podcast and they don't want to be another one of those podcasts, and I want to be the guy they turn to be like, how do I make this successful in the long term? So it's definitely, it can be translated to many different industries. Now, I would like to ask a quick side question, and you can keep your answer short if you can. But I'm simply curious, what would be an example of what one of those things would be that you would send up into space that's small and like those small satellites? Like, exactly
a CubeSat? Okay, so they generally do measurement, detection, photography, that kind of thing.
Right,
so they're getting imagery or they're getting data of some kind, like temperature or radiation, that kind of thing.
Okay.
And so that's where the machine learning is very helpful as well, because it's pulling all this data. I mean, you generally send out like we're talking about mega constellations now, right? Tens, hundreds, thousands of these things. And so they are beaming all that data back to a ground station, and then something has to be done with it. It's got to be filtered and sorted and figured out, like, what insights do we get from this so that we can make better decisions from it.
Right. Okay.
So, but imagery is a big deal. People have this sense that, oh, the Earth is all figured out and we know everything about it. That is utter nonsense. Actually, we know very little about it, and particularly under the water and that. So, for example, there's a company right now running around the world, going from venture capital and Space Expo to venture capital pitch meeting at Space Expo, trying to raise money for a mega constellation to watch the agrarian and water, the bays of Brazil, because there's tons and tons of coves and waterways and that right in Brazil, and nobody is watching this stuff. So there's all kinds of information that could be gathered about natural resources and management, fisheries, right, and minerals and things like that. And also to watch for, is somebody doing something that they shouldn't be doing? Right. There's some policing as well there.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that's interesting that you're at the forefront of making sure those kinds of things actually, work. Before you send something up there to do that and make sure it doesn't fail.
Right. Well, a cheap CubeSat, a commercial one. I mean, my technical advisor, Dr. Rick Fleeter at Brown, they made one for $5,000, but that was with a lot of student labor, and it did one thing. That's it. But a cheap one is usually around $100,000.
Wow.
So this can add up pretty quickly.
Wow, that's crazy. So let's say there's a listener out there who is in, any industry. I mean, it really doesn't matter. It can be any industry. Let's say they're in their industry and they want to be the person, the guy or gal who people call on to solve a specific problem.
Mm-hmm.
What would be your advice for them?
Okay, so a lot of people who start podcasts don't even have that in their heads, right? As an
Right.
objective. And that's the reason why they just dissipate, right? I have focus. It's on space and small sets and process improvement. And I don't care how great Oprah is. She ain't getting on my show, right? Because it's just not a fit, right?
Right.
No matter how wonderful she is and how great a guest she is, she's not relevant or appropriate for that target market. So just having the idea of, hey, I want to brand myself, position myself as the problem solver of a specific issue, that would be a great start for a podcaster, right? It would give you a lot of focus, because I see folks hopping around, and I used to do this, from guest to guest and going, ooh, that'd be cool. That person would be great to have on. They'd be interesting. Maybe I can tap into their market, right, and their audience by having them on. But is it tied together, right? Is there a common thread running through it? And most of the time, no. it's just left, right, whatever. Oh, now I've got a mishmash. So, and that's a caution that I'd like to state for our listeners is, it's not enough just to produce content. Like, maybe stopping at 5 episodes is the right answer if you haven't figured this out. So really the key, though, is to get out there, intermingle with your target market, and hear them say their pain points, right? Mm-hmm. This is something that I am constantly listening for. It's great that I've identified from these NASA studies and stuff like that there is this 40+% failure rate, but do they care? Right? I need to hear the target audience say in their words what they care about that is related to something that I could solve, right? Or that I can go get capability to solve.
And how would you recommend someone go about getting that communication and hearing what the people are saying?
So doing the podcast is important, right? That is, so I just said, don't create content for the sake of creating content,
right.
But do go create content for the sake of learning. Absolutely. Right. But I mean, there's a focus there again, right? I'm going out, like, I bring people on and they're all space people, and I am learning a lot from what they say. And so from that, these problems are going to come out. Now, again, like you said, it doesn't just have to be space. A long time ago in the galaxy far, far away, when I started out online back in like 2011, there was a forum that I went to and interacted with, and they had an offline sub-forum. So this was not the internet marketing folks. It was the brick and mortar business owners. And I spent 3 months of evenings just sitting in there, talking to people, responding to their posts, seeing what kind of questions that they had, what kind of problems that they had, responding. I didn't go in and go, hey, I'm Jason Kanigan, I'm the greatest, you should buy my stuff, right? I didn't even know what to sell them at the beginning. And so over that period of 2-3 months, I got, because I could have done copywriting. I've been a copywriter for 20 years, interviewed by Dan Kennedy's company. I could have done web design. I was a business development manager for an IT firm back in Vancouver before I moved to the States. And WordPress, I mean, been using that since the early 2000s. 2008 was when I was doing that business development management job. So by the time 2011 came around, I'd had several years of experience with that stuff, which still bothers people today. Like, they don't know how to use WordPress, and I'm like, why don't you just understand? Oh, anyway. So, and then technical writing or sales training. These were all things that I knew about, and I didn't just go in there and go, hey, buy my stuff, I can do all these things, or any one of those things, and push them, right? I let the market tell me, hey, there is a need in this subforum for a consultative sales training. And so I put out a consultative sales training program, and it was an iterative process. At first, I delivered it on a phone call. Then I made a lousy audio recording. Then I turned it into a video. And then I expanded it after a year into a video series that I had professionally recorded by TV producer friends of mine. All right. So, like, it can take a while, but when I launched that thing, I made $30,000. It was like, there you go. Okay. And so if you contrast that with the, I got to make a buck today kind of attitude that a lot of people come into running their own business with, it's no wonder that they fail, because they're constantly zigzagging, looking for new tech ideas, right, or technique to get money, but they don't have that common thread or that focus that says, okay, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm looking for, even knowing what you're looking for, right? Which is, I want to hear a problem. I want to hear that target market say, I have a problem in this area, and I can go, aha, I can solve that. Now, and I mean, stuff happens along the way. Like I interviewed Rick Fleeter for my show, and then he came back and said, hey, do you want me to be your technical engineering advisor? And I said, sure. I'd be crazy to say no, right? And so from that, suddenly I got the capability and more connections to be able to go out and actually do the engineering side of things that I have said, no, I don't do that. But I could go out today and get a team together to go design a rocket. Now, Jason Kanigan has no business doing that, right? But he can get a team together after being inundated for 6 months in this industry, right? And making all those network connections and putting out 17 episodes of Space plus, I think 6 others that I had interspersed in with the previous, 80, 90 episodes, right?
Right.
So, yes. So I do want to caution people that it is going to take a little while, probably, unless you worked in that industry and you're coming right into podcasting knowing, okay, I know exactly what the problems are and the solutions that I'm providing, and people take me seriously about it and that kind of thing, right? If you don't have that, you are in a swamp, and the way out is to walk. The map is not the territory. You're going to have to get muddy and walk out and find out, okay, what do people actually want here? So showing up with this picture in your head of, oh, I'm just going to create a podcast and I'm going to get interesting guests on and we're going to talk. That's a variety show. That doesn't lead to money unless you build an audience and want to charge for advertising on it. And at that point, you might as well be a television station or a radio station or something like that.
Right. Now, what are your thoughts on, because, with your podcast, it wasn't spaced the whole time.
Right.
It's been spaced for what, 6 months?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. August, September.
Yeah. So something as well I found about podcasting is that it's not unheard of and it's not impossible to change the direction and change the focus of the podcast to accommodate changes in like your personal business and just in the market in general, and in what the people want, what problems they have. And if you find a problem, you're better suited to solve. The topics
and we mentioned that last time. The easiest thing to do is to commit, make the dividing line, and just say, okay, season 2 is going to be about this other thing.
Yeah.
Right. And
right.
Nobody's ever messaged me going, what? First season, you were all about the unexpected challenges of growing businesses, and particularly software as a service firms. And now it's a space thing, Well, yeah, it's still about the unexpected challenges of growing space companies and satellite manufacturers. Just changing that focus there.
Right.
Yeah. But look for that problem to solve and then gear your content around it.
I think that's very interesting, and I agree with you that a lot of people miss that in business. I mean, it's hard, especially at the beginning, and especially if money's tight. It's hard to separate yourself and get out from under the threat of money. And I mean, there are certain things like at the beginning, especially if the business is just completely new, depending on what it is. I mean, you can try to get to a certain number of clients and then kind of back off, like enough clients so you have money to get out from under the stress of money, and then kind of back off. But if you really want long-term business success, I agree. That's a good strategy. Go where the people are hanging out, like Facebook groups and LinkedIn and all that kind of stuff. And just take, like you said, months even, and just be there and answer questions and see what people are talking about and what questions people are asking. Write down the common ones, and then look and say, can I solve these questions, and can I do it in a way that people would pay me to solve it.
Right.
And it really and honestly, it gives you returns faster than you think. Like I don't go on Facebook groups as often as I should, I think, but
Mm.
even now there occasionally are people who will send me a random email saying, hey, I saw an answer or saw something you posted on this Facebook group. I want to talk,
Mm-hmm.
and that could lead to business. So it really did. There's never underestimate the power of the long game. I feel like even though it's hard to not just try to get a buck today, like you said.
Right, but that won't give your podcast the focus that it needs, and it'll run out
Right.
of gas. So,
Right. Yeah. And then what would you say about people who are maybe just starting and they're gonna dive into social media and things like that and try to answer questions.
mhm.
Would you recommend to start a podcast and then have the podcast kind of change over time to accommodate what your research shows you while also kind of taking the time to begin slowly building an audience? Or would you rather have them just wait until they know that what they have is a good idea, and then okay, now I'm going to start a podcast? Because I always think about the phrase, when was the best time to plant a tree? Well, the
Mhm.
best time was 20 years ago, but the second best time is now. It's like
Right.
it's hard to not just start right away, even if you're not 100% where you want to be, knowing that you can change it in the future. So what are your thoughts on that?
Right. Right. I actually use a phrase like that in the little outro of the introduction snippets to my show. Uh, I guess that comes down to personal preference. I'm not going to tell people not to get started, but I do not want
Mhm.
to see them run out of gas either.
Right.
Because they came in full of piss and vinegar and thought, oh yeah, I'm going to change the world, and then nobody cares. I'm not relevant. I don't, you know. So a great place to start from is having some expertise already. If you have no expertise in the topic that you profess that you want to make money at, I don't know what you're doing there. That's the first thing. And that may sound weird, but there's a lot of people out there like that, right? And so having been running my own business since 2011, and I also ran a consulting business for a couple of years back in Vancouver. It can be rough. I think one of the major things is that podcasting needs to be fun. The
Mhm.
moment that it turns into a slog, just like blogging was, right? I have a blog. It's been around for 6 years, and I work on it only once a month now, and it's kind of fun when I do it. And it's a whopping 45 minutes of effort. And I get to talk about whatever I want to talk about, and it does its thing, right? So podcasting is a fantastic door opener, but the question is, what are you going to do with it once you've opened that door, right?
Mhm.
Where do you go? And so I do want to cover this, actually, Evan, because
Yeah.
I made a mistake, and I knew I had made this mistake from day one of my podcast. I never had an opt-in. Right.
Mm.
And we quickly covered this, but I want to, having had a few more weeks of experience with it, and that getting some subscribers on an email list and getting them used to hearing from you. Right. It's an interesting kind of way to get people to consume even more content from you. Cause I don't just do podcast episodes where they're interviews. Sometimes they're solo episodes of me exploring a topic or pontificating about something around process engineering, and trying to
Mhm.
get them to open their minds up a little bit about this stuff. And that was a major thing that was missing. It was I had no way of drawing these listeners off and capturing them in a container where I knew who they were.
Mhm.
That sounds kind of crazy, but I didn't do it, and I knew that I should have. So I think I started doing that in November or December or something like that. It's made some difference. And then having maybe an autoresponder series in there. There's a
Mhm.
lot of people who say, oh, email's dead. No, it's just doing fine. I know a lot of people who are making plenty of money from email.
Right.
A lot of them are e-commerce store owners. So they have the pretty thing over here, but then, they're selling through email over
Mhm.
on the other side. So
Right.
I want to make sure that people know that they should have some way of capturing those listeners and finding out who they are and then developing that relationship with them further.
Because it is, I mean, it's a great place to, you get those listeners, but a lot of people, like, their end goal is, I want to get a certain number of downloads.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's great. Good for you. But why? Then what?
Right.
What's your plan? You have these downloads. Now what's your plan? Now what are you going to do? So you have to be able to find a way to, get to know them better and get the conversation going, because you can't just rely on, they know your name, they know where to find you, like on Facebook.
Right.
Hopefully they'll reach out and send you a message and be like, hey, listen to your podcast, I like it. That may happen sometimes.
Unlikely.
That's unlikely. Yeah. It may happen rarely when you get bigger, but up until that point,
right,
and through that point, you need to have a way to get those attention. So I like that you highlighted that.
Now, something that I just started doing, and again, this is another thing that I should know or should have known, but I just didn't do. Okay. I've had a lot of guests now, podcast guests, come on. So they have gone through a process where I've reached out to them, I've connected with them, I've messaged them, hey, what do you think about being on a podcast? We covered that language in the last video, I think. They've picked a date, they've waited some time because there is that gap, right, to be able to talk. We've done our recording, and then they've gone, so what do you do? I'm like, you see the company name, I link to the website, et cetera, right? And it's you really have to kind of grab them by the collar and show them. And so what I've started doing is a 2.5-minute video, personalized thing, and it doesn't have to be that long, or it could be longer. Again, it's up to you what information you want to get across. But as soon as somebody books to be on the podcast, I'm sending them a quick personalized video of, hey, Evan, it's Jason from Cold Start Tech. I wanted to take a minute and explain what we do. And just say it, right. Here's the problem we're looking to solve. Oh, okay. Because I kept on having to explain that after the podcast interview was done. And it really made me scratch my head. So it kind of says something about the lack of initiative of most people, even smart people, right? They're busy with their own stuff. You're just not that important. But once they've had that discussion with you, now you're buddies a little bit, right? And so now they're more interested in learning about you. So, and I don't want to take away that conversation after the episode's recorded, because that's a very useful time. But some of that information can be covered in this quick video, and I think they take you a little more seriously too.
Exactly. And that's something that I've been thinking about recently. I think that's a really good idea. First of all, I like that, and I think I'm going to incorporate that as well, because it is true that people, they don't, you reach out, you ask them if they want to be in the podcast, they'll say sure, and then they may know what you'll be talking about on the podcast, but they don't know exactly what you do, right? Like what you do for money or what problems you solve. Yep. And I think that sending that video definitely wouldn't take away that end of interview conversation. It would, I think, like what I would think would happen would be, it would be just a more valuable conversation. Like it wouldn't just be what you do. This is what I do. You could
skip the early part of it, right?
Right. Yeah. Just skip the small talk and dive right into the meat of it, Because
my guest yesterday, he's a PhD in England. He did not know I was the owner of the company. He knew there was a company. He knew it was called Cold Star, but he wasn't sure. Was I funded by it? Did they pay me to do it? How did this work? And so, it took me a sentence to explain I'm the owner. It's my company. But this picture of what's going on in other people's heads, right? We walk around thinking they know what we know. They don't. They have pigeonholed you somewhere. And it may not be accurate. So take steps. And again, these things don't take very long. Emailing my list once a day does not take me very long, right? Shooting a quick video, hey Evan, how are you? This is what I do. Doesn't take very long, but you got to get into the rhythm of it.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that speaks to a lot of entrepreneurs being afraid of being direct that way, because so much time, I feel like as entrepreneurs, we spend so much time thinking about ways to attract people and sell to people without actually selling to them. Because people love to people love to buy, but they hate to be sold. And so it's you, of course, as a human being, your first instinct might be to just be like, hey, I see you have this problem. Can I solve it for you? But you're not, people will be like, whoa, you're trying to sell me, get
Right.
away from me, right? Even if it's exactly what they want and need. So as
Right.
entrepreneurs, we spend so much time trying to find ways around that and try to get people to give us money without just straight out asking for it. So being direct like that definitely takes some kind of getting used to, if you will. Has that kind of been your experience as well?
Not really, because I'm not approaching it like, well, okay. This goes back to my Sandler-based sales training. You have to get permission to diagnose, right? Like a
Right.
doctor should not just come up to you and go, "Hey, Evan, you know, here's a prescription." What? I didn't ask for anything, right? So they have to say, "Hey, can you look at me, right? Can you look at my business and tell me what's going on?" But there's nothing wrong with saying, "Hey, Evan, my name's Jason. I run this company called Cold Start Tech. We solve problems for space companies that are finding that their small sat failure rate is ridiculous, over 30-35%. Now, that's a
Right.
gimme. I know it's going to be over 30-35%, right?
Right.
Because I know the real answer is above 40. But I could get into something like that, and that's it. Now, I'm not shoving anything at anybody. I'm just saying, hey, this is what we do,
Right. And I think
right?
the podcast really helps with that as well, because
Mm-hmm.
like you said, if there's a doctor, right, and you have to
Mm-hmm.
give them permission to diagnose. Well, if you've been listening to that doctor's podcast about all the great things he's done and all the knowledge he has, he or she, you would reach out and want that doctor to diagnose you. So
Mm-hmm.
that's something as well I find is a good benefit of podcasting. And kind of what you're talking about, being the space guy, you know, the success might not be as good if you just reached out to a random person who you know you could help, but told them, hey, like I see you're a space company, right? This is what I do, Cold Start Technologies. Can I help you with that? That might not be as successful if that person hadn't been an avid listener of your podcast.
Mm-hmm.
If
Well,
they were
and you
listening
don't
to that.
even say, "Can I help you with that?"
Well, yeah, however you were to go
You
about
just you
saying it.
just say, "This is what we do. These are the problems that we solve," and it's brief, and we're done. And if they know somebody who's in that situation, perhaps themselves, then they can do something about it.
Right.
I will say, if you go back and listen to the earlier episodes of my show, I don't have an insert in there of anything, and I started putting in like a sponsorship insert, let's say, right? I did start putting in little like minute and a half section where I tell people about the email list and that they can subscribe to it and where to go and what to do about that. And then about a month, 6 weeks after that, then I started putting in an actual like 2-minute commercial
Mm,
of and it's kind of ranty, right? I'm sick and tired of this, right? This 40+% failure rate. That's not okay. And if you think it's okay, you're crazy, right? And
right.
I had a gulp moment about that. I did, where I'm like, I wonder if this is a bit too harsh, right? And edgy, and is it offensive? And I thought, good,
Right.
I'm keeping it. That's good. That's going to create a reaction, whether they click off in horror or stick around and say, "Hey, yeah, I totally agree." He's not talking about me, of course. It's those
Right,
other
right, right.
companies, those other manufacturers out there that need the help. So I now have 2 breaks in the show, one for the email opt-in reminder and the other to talk about a problem that we solve. And I'll be able to record more and rotate those in as we continue. And I really started noticing that Malcolm Gladwell has a podcast, and he has 4, 5, 6 inserts in there, and those are like outright commercials
Right,
for other people. And I'm like, okay, if he can do that, I can do this.
right. And is that the main way then, how you're getting people to get on the email list, like how we talked about earlier, where you have these listeners, how do you get that conversation going, and is it mainly through the
Yeah,
insert for the email
and in
list?
social media where I'm adding in a post underneath the content post, like a
Mm,
reminder, hey, you can also opt in for updates by email at this link. coldstartech.com/MSB, short for make space boring. Go there now. Do it now.
Right. Okay. So as we kind of wind down the podcast, what would be your action item? So let's say, because one thing that I don't like when there's a great podcast episode on a podcast and there's a listener, oh well, that's so much valuable stuff, that's great, and the podcast episode ends and nothing changes and they just keep going and they don't do anything. So what would be your action items or action item that you have to make sure that listeners take what we've talked about in this episode and our first one? And
take advantage of the nonsense that I did and put up with for the last year and a half. Okay, learn from what I had to suffer through. It's not about the gear. I use this $30 headset. The audio is great. People make fun of me for wearing it. Why are you wearing all that stuff on your head? Whatever, I don't care. Because I want good quality sound with noise cancellation. But big deal. It's not about the gear. And yet that is the first question you see people going to, right? What microphone should I, whatever. Be relevant, right? The action step is look for a serious problem that you have the capability to solve. Listen to, watch your target market for them to tell you what it is, right? Look for symptoms and then the root core of the problem. What is causing this thing? Where do those symptoms come from? And that gives you your copy, that gives you what to talk about and what your sales page should look like and that kind of thing, what your sales conversation can be mapped out like. So be willing to invest a little time in finding that out and doing a few little twists and turns. I mean, we see TV shows with 8 episodes, and that's a season, right? Some have 3. If you go on Hulu or something, right, you'll find TV shows with 3 episodes, and that's a season.
Wow.
That's what they got funded for. It's usually BBC stuff, right? British stuff. But so don't think, oh no, I have to have 20 episodes before I make a left turn here or something like that. You can change it at any time. The second thing is get that email list. And you can go to some free email subscriber service, right? I'm using MailerLite right now, and whatever, it's fine. It does what I want it to do. So build that in from day one, and as I said, get that statement out there. Maybe a personalized video or an audio on LinkedIn, or even just a little write-up. If you wanted to paste that in, you could, or email somebody, a guest with it, of what you do and the problem that you solve, right? Don't take it for granted that they're going to know who you are or that they're going to look. Very few people have actually even looked at the website or the profile on LinkedIn. It's astonishing. It's like, okay. How do you know?
Lazy,
right? Yeah. So help them with that. You don't need to be pushy. You're just saying a statement of fact, right? And you can leave it up to them as to what they do with that information, but make sure that they get it, right? And sure. And be willing to have those inserts in your show. Be willing to have a moment where you break out and come back into the interview. Drop in the reminders to opt in and also the problem that you solve. So if you did that, you would be well ahead of most podcasters who are kind of wishy-washy. They don't know why they're making this content. Keep it fun. It definitely should stay fun, but there is a common thread, an underlying purpose behind all this stuff.
Yeah. So go out and figure out what problem you solve. So find a problem, know that you can solve it. Make sure people know what you do and know that you can solve the problem and you're the person to do it. And then make an email, get an email subscriber platform, put it in your podcast so that you can begin the conversation with people to get to the point where you can solve their problem. I think those are very, very valuable action items.
It sounds so basic, Evan. It sounds so basic. And as like an online marketer for 9 years now, you would think that I would know to do this stuff, but it was so easy to ignore it. Right? And I'd have the little
Right.
voice in the back of my head going, Jason, you should do this. You need to do this, right? You need to put these things in here. You're missing out by not doing. No, I'm creating content. I'm on the train of creating content here.
Right. Yeah. It's not. You have to have. I mean, if you don't have that in there, then creating content, you're just doing it to do it.
Right.
So yeah.
Right. And you get a body of work. Body of work is important. We talked about that last time, but
Yep.
It's not the only thing by itself. If you actually want to make money from your podcast,
Right.
with consulting gigs, not advertising to like a affiliate product or something like that, which is another thing you could do. Right. I'm talking about offering a specific product or service.
Yeah. And that is something else you could do, and that'll be a whole other podcast in itself. But honestly, I think the goal of a podcast isn't in affiliate income or sponsorship money. It's really in using it with a business. I mean, you can make good money.
A lot of people seem to get into it for that reason.
But like the real way you can find that success, like the true, really, really good success from a podcast, I don't think is always from sponsorships or affiliates, because you need to have a lot of that in there to make a decent amount of money. It's really the goal of it, the meat of it is in your own personal business and your personal brand and selling consulting or a product or your own thing. Because, and even sometimes it's kind of hard for people to think of it that way, because it's not like you're making money directly from the podcast. So you feel like, oh, the podcast is just a waste of money. But by bringing people to the business, it is very much not a waste of money. So
and you don't need a huge list or a huge following to do it. You need the right people.
Exactly. I'd rather have a small amount of dedicated followers who you could help, as opposed to a huge number of random people who you have no idea what their deal is. So yeah. So Jason, thank you so much for those action items and for coming on a second time and rounding out the story and covering all the bases and giving people this value. So I really appreciate your time.
Well, good. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Path to Podcast Success. Make sure to head over to ipodcastedit.com to check out the show notes and get each episode of the show delivered right to your inbox. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or whichever audio service you use. If you want to continue the conversation, or you have a topic you'd like me to discuss on a future episode of the show, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you again for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next episode as we continue down the path to podcast success.